Ah, Smart Water. Pure, crisp taste.
That's really good water.
It's the kind of water that says, I have my life together.
I do feel more sophisticated.
Smart Water. For those with a taste for taste. Grab yours today.
Get lost in the acoustic brilliance of 3D audio that surrounds you. Feel the embrace of the massage seats that adapt to your every move. Experience the warmth of a vehicle that welcomes you as you approach. We could tell you what makes a Lincoln SUV so extraordinary, but don't take our word for it. Take it on a test drive at the Lincoln Summer Invitation with exclusive offers on now, only at your local Lincoln retailer.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
3 minutes after the hour, ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned for another exciting edition of the Dr. Sky Experience. We're here and proudly on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Get in early on the conversation. As always, great guest as we move back to our regular realms of subject matter from the realms of astronomy, space, aviation, and weather, with an emphasis on weather and the story of climate change, whether you're a believer or somewhere in the middle or even a denier. But breaking news continues here for our friends and listeners throughout the tri-state area. A 3.8 magnitude earthquake struck northeastern New Jersey late Saturday night, as many may already know, sending tremors across New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. The event occurred at 10:18 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, with its epicenter located in Hasbrook Heights, a Bergen County community. The tremor were felt all the way into New York City and areas around the tri-state. We'll keep you posted on that as we continue here, and I'm sure the WABC newsroom will be, of course, updating you all through the night. We continue, ladies and gentlemen, talking about the great subjects of astronomy, space, aviation, and weather. If you'd like to email me, Dr. Sky, it's just DRSKY, of course, at WABCRadio.com. And if you'd always like to listen, and we hope you will, and want to, of course, listen to not only this particular archive, the Dr. Sky Experience, but all the many great hosts that are so much in focus with the subject matters that they talk about. The archive for all of us is simply WABCRadio.com or RedAppleAudioNetworks.com. A special shout out to Tony and Bill. They're the helmsmen. Without them, this radio show would not sound as good as it's coming to you, and hopefully it is. I'm confident of that. They navigate this powerful signal of 77 WABC to you, the nation, the world, and I'm even sure out into the cosmos. You may have different opinions on the subject that we're going to be talking about, and in a few minutes we'll introduce a guest that's been on the Dr. Sky Experience in the past, and hopefully he'll continue in the future. We'll introduce in just a moment Tom Harris. Who's he? The Executive Director of the International Climate Science Coalition. But ladies and gentlemen, before that, not to make this sound like we're in a classroom at this early hour or evening that you're listening to us, but a definition of weather goes like this: the state of the atmosphere at a place and time with regard to heat, dryness, pressure, sunshine, wind speed, rain, etc. But a definition on the other side of climate goes like this: average weather in a given area over a longer period of time, and maybe even as long as 30 or more years. Did you know there are 5 types of climate? That's true: tropical, temperate, arid, continental, and polar. But in my opinion, studying the world of astronomy for years, all weather naturally comes from the sun. And folks, if you're like me, maybe this would be a dream vacation for me, or maybe you've done this. They say one of the best climates on the entire earth is the beautiful archipelago or area called the Canary Islands. Between 2015 and 2024, we've registered some of the warmest temperatures. But there are many people out there that do not necessarily believe that climate change is real, and in this particular show, we try to balance out the equation. Our special guest, Tom Harris, the International Climate Science Coalition. His organization is a nonprofit group of independent scientists, economists, and energy and policy experts formed in 2008 to promote better understanding of climate science and policy worldwide. Their organization aims to help create an environment in which a more rational, open discussion about climate issues emerges, thereby moving the debate away from the implementation of costly and ineffective climate control measures. The organization encourages assisting, that is, vulnerable peoples to adapt to climate variability and continuing scientific research into the causes and impact of climate change. Tom Harris, lives and works in the Canadian capital, just above New York State, Ottawa, Canada. He has 30 years' experience as a mechanical engineer, project manager, science and technology communications professional, and a technical trainer. He was science and technology advisor to a former opposition senior environment critic in Canada's Parliament from 2006 to 2008. And he was the executive director of the National and Natural Resources Stewardship Project in Canada. With that long and hopefully complete introduction, good morning to Tom Harris. Tom, how are you up in Canada?
Oh, I'm great. How are you, Dr. Sky?
I'm doing well, my friend, and we just got that news, which I'm sure many in the New York metro area have heard already, but we didn't want to be redundant, and that will also be part and parcel later in our conversation. And folks, if you have questions about the great subject that we're talking about, one of the great realms that we love, astronomy, space, aviation, and weather, the number, of course, your number direct to us is 1-800-848-9222. Tom Harris, take us down the road of some of the new things that you would like to talk about, because I have tons of them, and I'm sure the listeners out there, pro or con, on the subject of climate change. Let's begin, and let's hear from you.
Well, I think the biggest thing is that the Trump administration is going to rescind the endangerment finding against greenhouse gases. And, of course, in the United States, if you don't count water vapor, the main greenhouse gas that we're emitting, 80% of it is carbon dioxide. So he's, Trump and the head of the EPA, Lee Zeldin, they're actually going to withdraw the endangerment finding. And, this is something that people should understand where it came from. Because, the environmental groups have been trying for decades to get carbon dioxide declared a pollutant that should be controlled under the Clean Air Act. But the Bush administration, the most recent one, they actually turned it down. But of course, just before Obama came in, the Supreme Court did this, and this is very important, and it's something that's going to have to be overturned. The Supreme Court in 2007 made a decision in a court case called Massachusetts versus EPA that greenhouse gases were pollutants that could be controlled under the Clean Air Act. And so the EPA had an obligation, a legal obligation, to make a finding as to whether or not they caused dangerous and hazard to human health and welfare. Now, of course, they didn't do much when Bush was still president, but as soon as Obama came in, the endangerment finding against primarily carbon dioxide was enabled. And that was in 2009, in the beginning of Obama's terms. But that became the foundation for literally $1 trillion in regulations. And the withdrawal of this particular endangerment finding, which is what the EPA are doing right now, will save $54 billion a year. Okay, it's a massive deal. And I'd say if they succeed, and it's going to go right to the Supreme Court, and we can talk about the legal side in a minute, but if they succeed, this will be a huge benefit to all Americans.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, under the restrictive side of the Obama and Biden administration, we see a lot of these things popping in the other direction. So give us a couple of these other, areas. Let's talk about wind power, because apparently the president's not too keen on that, and so many people who do believe that that's not an answer to sustainable energy. Let's talk about what they're trying to do there with wind power. Is there any specifics you can give the audience?
Yeah, he's trying to end all offshore wind power, and that's a very good thing to do because already we know that it's messing up the migration patterns of whales, not just during the operation, but especially during the construction. If you think about it, let's say somebody dropped a magnesium flare in your backyard. I mean, that would blind you. That would be terrible. My dad dropped those during World War II, and he said it would light up the ocean for 10 miles. Okay? Mm-hmm. Well, when we're pile driving into the ocean floor to make the foundation for these wind turbines, it's causing sound waves. And, of course, whales see by sound primarily, as sonar. It's causing sound waves. The sound waves are equivalent to dropping a magnesium flare in your backyard when it comes to the whales. And so it is literally messing them up. Their navigation is put off. We think that they may actually be being killed. We're not sure. But the bottom line is Trump has said until they show that it's not a hazard to whales, he doesn't want to see any more of those at all.
Well, I salute the president, as many people do, because the cetaceans that occupy the oceans, they've been around a lot longer, right, Tom, than we have. And you're so right. I mean, whether you watch one of the Star Trek movies where I guess Mr. Spock melded with one of the whales, that's another story in science fiction, but it also has a lot to say about how precious they are and how we need to keep the oceans free. And also, there's other sound waves that are coming. That's a story for another time. But let's also talk about the impact that birds. We've had specialists in ornithology, the birds. We will have another gentleman, Mr. Dr. Farnsworth, coming up later in the month, talking about things going on with birds. And if you've ever seen, I'm sure you have, and maybe people haven't, the propellers on those things, when they transport them, it's like they need a whole armada just to get them down the street. And God help us, how do they make a turn on the street? I have no idea.
Yeah, well, in fact, there was one wind farm in California, the Altamont Pass. It's been operating for about 40 years, and they kill dozens of golden eagles every year. Wow. So the death toll of these large birds you kill one of those, and it has a significant impact on the local environment. One thing I got to point out though is that bats, which are crucially important. I mean, they control our mosquito population.
They do.
Bats are being killed at twice the rate of birds. And there's a good reason for this. Birds have to actually be hit by the turbine blade to be killed, whereas a bat, obviously, if it's hit, it's killed. But if they fly in the low-pressure zone behind the blade, their lungs burst and they drown in their own blood. And so it's a gruesome death, and in fact, this is a major problem. They're saying that in some regions, it will drive some bat species to extinction by this supposedly green energy.
Absolutely. In other words, look, this is open to the conversation here for people who believe, don't believe, and that's why what we do on this program, No Apology, is what? Open people's minds about these interesting subjects. And like we say, we like, as there are 4 types of conversation, without putting people to sleep, we love a conversation with dialogue. You can disagree all you want, but we welcome your conversation on this very important subject. Maybe many people out there haven't heard about half of this, but I'm certain that this is why we do this. The contact number, 1-800-848-9222. And I need not remind our California friends that are listening to Talk Radio 77 WABC. We know you're out there. If you drive right, Tom, by the Palm Springs area and coming, let's say, when I drive over to Los Angeles, albeit ever infrequently, you come across that that whole big valley with nothing but a overpopulated area of these turbine blades. It's just a different sight, let's put it that way. So I'm fascinated by this particular subject. But what other things is happening at the EPA with Mr. Zeldin? I appreciate learning more, and so do our listeners, about some of the things that this administration is trying to go back and cancel from this other, intense environmental issues that many people are not happy with.
Well, right. And one of the things that actually it's the head of the Energy Department did this. Okay, this is really important. They were looking ahead, and they knew that they would have to have science justification for withdrawing the endangerment finding for carbon dioxide. So let's see, Chris Wright, who's the head of the Department of Energy, he chose 5 top leading scientists, one of them an economist, and he asked them, find out how reliable is the science that's being used to back up the climate scare, to back up the endangerment finding and all the tailpipe emissions and all that sort of thing. And they released their report just before this withdrawal of the endangerment finding was announced. And it's actually open. The report is open for public comment on the U.S. Register right now. And the endangerment finding is also open for comment. And later this month, the 19th and the 20th, they're going to have virtual comments from the public on the endangerment finding. But the really important thing that Chris Wright did is he got these leading experts together. And I'll just list them. There's just 5 of them.
Yes, please.
The pair, Christie and John Christie and Roy Spencer. These are the satellite gurus, the people who tell us what the temperatures are based on satellite across the world. They also brought in Steve Koonin, who, believe it or not, was actually a top advisor for climate in the Obama administration. They also brought in Ross McKittrick from Guelph University, a leading economist who understands the social cost of carbon, which is a bit of a joke. We can talk about that later. And the last one was Judith Curry. She was previously with Georgia Institute of Technology, also a leading climate expert. And what these people found was that the science does not support the climate scare. And they said that if the U.S. does what the current endangerment finding is forcing them to do, it will have negligible impact on climate. It won't even be detectable in most cases. They're also saying that the economic damage caused by warming because of CO2 has been grossly exaggerated, massively exaggerated. So these two things, the endangerment finding and then this report from the Department of Energy, which now backs it up, are very important developments. I put my hat off to Chris Wright for, Department of Energy and Lee Zeldin from EPA. They're doing a great job.
Absolutely. This is amazing. Our special guest, if you're just tuning in here to the Dr. Sky Experience on Talk Radio 77, WABC, is Tom Harris. He's the Executive Director of the International Climate Science Coalition. He comes to us from Ottawa, Canada, where, of course, ladies and gentlemen, he's jam-packed with information. I wanted you to, as if we're doing like a little seminar for education here, and I appreciate both sides of the conversation, talk a little bit more about the whole evolution of the Paris Climate Accord and what it is, because many people keep hearing that. Well, according to the the Paris Climate Accord, this and that is what their focus is, and all the nations just link up to this. And again, tell us more how that gets started and what is it, so people know where this conversation goes.
Yeah, and it's really important that they understand where it came from, because what it'll show you is that the developing countries, and they still list China as a developing country under the climate agreements, they have no targets at all. And people don't understand this. You see, you got to go back to 1992. When the first George Bush, actually agreed to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. They agreed to this at the Earth Summit in Brazil, 1992, and our Prime Minister Mulroney agreed too. And that laid the foundation for decades now of climate agreements like the Paris Accord, like the Kyoto Protocol, things like that. So this was the foundation, the Framework Convention on Climate Change, and it's really important people understand that the Framework Convention has something called Article 4, and it says that the overriding priority of developing nations is not greenhouse gas emissions, it's poverty alleviation and development. So they have an out clause. They have an out clause, and people don't know this. They say, according to the Paris Agreement, China has to cap its emissions in 2030 and not increase further. But what's going to happen, Dr. Sky, is they're going to soar right through that limit. And then when people say, well, what the heck? You agreed in the Paris Agreement to cap your emissions. They're going to point back at the fundamental underlying document, which is the rules for the UN climate treaties, and they're going to say, we have an out clause. It's right here. So they're going to go, they have double the U.S. emissions right now coming from China. It's going to be triple by 2030, and they will continue to increase as much as they want. Now, you'd laugh, Dr. Sky, this is one thing that's quite funny. At the climate conference in Peru in 2014, they cornered the Chinese ambassador, Chinese negotiator, and they said, look, this is kind of unfair. China's not really a developing country anymore, and you guys you'll have no limits at all based on the Framework Convention. And so, because they were negotiating the Paris Agreement at the time, and the Chinese negotiator, knowing that they have a really great situation, he said the purpose of the Paris Agreement is to enforce the Framework Convention, not to change it. So they know they have a sweetheart deal. So not surprisingly, the Chinese, want to see the climate scare continue. And of course, they are, according to some politicians in Washington, they're investigating it right now. They're funding, apparently, some of the environmental groups that are trying to force the United States to stay on this climate route.
That's amazing, Tom. Right, and I know in the universities they have something called the Confucius Institute where they talk about, loyalty to the Communist Chinese Party. I'm not an expert on that subject. We have other people that we can talk to, but we're talking with you. And one of the specifics I wanted to talk about, because people may not know this, what was the number metric that they set at the Paris Climate Accord about? In other words, we must keep temperatures down, or is that the way to say it?
Yeah.
It shouldn't exceed. What is that metric that they're saying the world should not exceed, unless the panacea or the concern, depending on who's listening and who cares?
Well, they say we have to keep it below 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, in other words, 1850 or earlier.
Right.
But it's more desirable to have a 1.5 degree limit. So they're trying to have a 1.5 degree limit. The thing is, we're almost there already. I mean, since 1880, the so-called global temperature, which is kind of a meaningless statistic because nobody lives in the globe. We all experience individual temperatures in regions. But regardless, it's already increased 1.2 degrees since 1880. So, I mean, are you going to tell me that 0.3 degrees in this fictitious global temperature is going to cause the end of the world? I mean, it's just silly. Richard Lindzen and others, when they look at these temperatures, one of the things they say, Richard Lindzen's from MIT, one of the leading scientists in the world, actually, and we can talk about an open letter that he, along with two others, sent to the court in The Hague, and they've just ignored it with their recent judgment. But he says that kind of temperature change, 1.2 degrees C in 145 years, is so small you wouldn't notice it in your entire life.
Well, this is interesting, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, we reach out far and wide with the power of Talk Radio 77 WABC. What do you think, ladies and gentlemen out there? Are you buying into some of the climate change so-called scare? Are you more on the side of saying, oh, this is absolutely a hoax? Or, respectfully, if you really believe it, come to the table. Give us your information, and this is not necessarily a debate. We don't really want to do that per se, but you're welcome at 1-800-848-9222. And we're not trying to filter conversation, certainly not, because our special guest, Tom Harris, who is he? The executive director at the International Climate Science Coalition. Very simply, from one man to another to the entire audience out there, what got you interested in this? I mean, you talk about being an engineer.
Yeah.
One day, were you just sitting in the car and your AC went out and you said, there's got to be a better way to do this. And I'm not trying to be funny. How did you get started in being so concerned?
I was an aerospace engineer, and my specialty was jet engines for fighter aircraft and stuff like that. And but I would actually give speeches promoting the space program because I've always been a Star Trek fan. And, I was 16 when they landed on the moon for the first time. I have all the newspapers. I've always been a real enthusiast for the space program. I just love it. And I used to say in my speeches that I gave lots of speeches to conferences and to schools. And I used to say, look, exploring the planets helps us better understand the Earth. And I gave various examples, like the greenhouse effect on Venus. And one thing I said, it turned out to be wrong. It turned out I was totally wrong. I said, the runaway greenhouse effect on Venus, where it's 95% carbon dioxide, is a warning as to what could happen on the Earth if, we don't control our CO2. Now, a local scientist who doesn't want me to use his name because he gets in trouble with his university, but regardless, it's very dangerous for these scientists to speak out. They can lose their jobs. Anyway, a local scientist, he liked my article so much that he used it in his course, and he said, it's great, but that part is wrong. The science part of the Venus thing is wrong, and there's lots of reasons why Venus is so hot. CO2 is only one of them. But what he said is, look, this cannot physically happen on the Earth because we have oceans that absorb the CO2, and we have plate tectonics at the bottom of the ocean that pulls the absorbed carbon into the Earth's crust, and it's constantly replenishing, so it's always a sink pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere.
No, that's amazing, Tom. Yeah, I'm not to cut you short, but I got to say something, and I hope you'll indulge me in this since we talk about aviation, and you're an aerospace engineer. I just want either a yay or a nay from you. Can you talk, and obviously many people have, about the Canadian Avro Arrow aircraft, one of the coolest airplanes I've ever seen? Are you familiar with it?
Oh, certainly. Mach 2. In fact, my master's thesis supervisor was the engine guy on the Avro Arrow. So, he always told us about what happened that day. It was a disaster. Canada had built by far the most advanced fighter in history. It was Mach 2 plus. This was in the late 1950s. And apparently various forces didn't like that. They didn't want to have Canada with the leading fighter in the world. And the Canadian government buckled, and they actually destroyed it, sadly. And a lot of our engineers that were working the Avro Arrow ended up working for NASA and were involved then in the moon landing. A lot of people don't realize, but there's a lot of Canadian content in the moon landing. The chief doctor, for example, was a Canadian. The first items to touch the moon on Apollo 11 were made in Lachine, Quebec. There are those little sensors that hang down from the lunar landing pods.
Tom. Totally amazing. Yeah. You know what we need to do here? We're going to come up on the heartbreak in here a minute. And I hate to cut a guy with so much energy here, but for another time, I'd love to talk with you about that and also about a Canadian so-called flying saucer type of aircraft that they develop, but that's for another subject at another time.
Sure.
In another dimension. But with us, ladies and gentlemen, talking about this very intelligently, obviously, that's why we select a guest like Tom Harris. He's Executive Director of the International Climate Science Coalition, jam-packed with information here, talking about these subjects. But what I'd like to get into in the next half hour of our 2-hour conversation here, 1-800-848-9222, ladies and gentlemen, for your questions and comments. This is serious stuff here because apparently what the Trump administration is doing, we're trying to unravel so many of these restrictive covenants. Now, many people may not like that, but in all due respect to the economy and things of that nature, well, that's what the people out there, I'm sure, will call in on with concerns about that. But when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about how the sun drives all weather. I mean, that's one of my specialty areas. I know you know this well. And we'll leave them in the next couple of minutes with just a couple of teasers. Because, Tom, obviously the big fusion ball in the sky, we always say, and I don't think you would disagree at all weather primarily comes from the sun. I mean, that's a general broad-based statement. No division or divisiveness there, right? That's a statement.
Oh, yeah. I agree completely. Yeah. Yeah. In fact, the sun is becoming, if you look at the latest science, is almost certainly the primary driver of the warming of the last century.
Yes, absolutely. And that's something that we don't see. And again, I don't want to attack anybody out there who believes, and of course, that's never my mantra, to attack, and nor do you. I mean, we're having a fair and open conversation here. We like dialogue. And that's so important because the Dr. Sky experience, ladies and gentlemen, in case you're a first-time listener, we really appreciate you. And anybody out there that's driving, we always say this to the truck drivers, men and women, the proud drivers who deliver the things that we need every day, the unsung heroes. Really, seriously, this is an interesting story. I'm sure in many of them they're listening to this particular archive. We welcome your calls. Tell us where you are. And obviously, you're probably very concerned about the price of fuel and what happens in a climate-intensive world. A very, very interesting subject. Tom, in this first half hour, how do people get in touch with you as we move into the next half hour?
Yeah, sure. The best way is to go to our homepage, which is www.icsc-climate.com. They can also listen to my shows on America Out Loud. America Out Loud has a podcast, and our podcast is called The Other Side of the Story. We do shows every week, and we talked actually this week exactly about the things that we're talking about now.
Wow. So there you go.
Something people can log in there and just search under shows, and you'll see The Other Side of the Story, which I host along with Todd Royal, who's a energy expert from Dallas. So it's a real fun show.
More when we come back, ladies and gentlemen, as we move to the hard break on a show that we call the Dr. Sky Experience. Hope you're with us, 1-800-848-9222. Your calls are welcome. Conversation, as we like, in the form of dialogue. We'll be right back with much more with our special guest, Tom Harris. A foolish faith in authority is the worst enemy of truth. An incredible quote that is, from one of the geniuses in astrophysics and the story of gravity, Albert Einstein. 32 minutes after the hour. And, of course, we want to thank the late Carol Channing for joining us with her speech, her little information, and her little promotion that we talk about keeping your eyes to the skies. Our special guest, Tom Harris, Executive Director of the National Climate Science Coalition, is here with us. And you know what? You're lighting up the phone lines. I wouldn't expect anything less, Tom. So let's say good morning to Alice in Ohio. Good morning, Alice. You're on with Tom Harris. How are you this morning? Or evening?
Very well. Very well. Thank you for asking. This is an interesting subject, and it's way above my pay grade. But I happen to agree with Mr. Harris. Mother Nature is cyclical. For example, Chatham, Mass., which is in the elbow of Cape Cod, the beaches were being eroded. Well, it has happened before, and then Mother Nature replenishes it. At the same time, I think around Myrtle Beach, the same thing was happening. Mother Nature will replenish it. I wish I understood why someone would want to put windmills out in the ocean. And why would they put windmills in the middle of a cornfield? It's killing birds, killing whales. I agree with you, and thank you so much for bringing this up.
Well, Alice, we appreciate you, and there's many good reasons why, people should be, paying attention to this, but I don't want to steal your thunder, Tom. Alice, I think she's made some good points. Your response?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, the main reason they're putting up the wind turbines is because the wind turbine companies are making an absolute fortune. Like across the world right now, there is, believe it or not, $3 billion a day being spent on climate finance. And most of it goes to the wind and solar power companies. Okay, so they have a vast incentive, a massive incentive to keep the scare going. There are other people who think that the government should be the controller of our energy. And as long as we're dependent on things like wind and solar power, you need huge government subsidies or they're not economic. And that, of course, means that more and more wind and solar mean the government come in charge. They become in charge of our energy. Things like coal, they don't need government support. I mean, yes. Coal is a cheap, inexpensive, very powerful energy source that built the United States, to, along with oil. And don't need it. But for those who think the government should run everything, they love wind and solar power because, of course, they need massive government subsidies.
That's amazing. Alice, I don't know if you're still with us, but we always give our guests, and go ahead, please. You get the final word.
Thank you. You brought up something political. I have felt that there was something political around this. I don't know that much about it, but yes, I think there was a lot of politics involved in it. A lot of people were look at Solyndra. That failed.
Exactly.
That failed. And you know the old saying, don't fool around with Mother Nature.
Oh yeah, exactly.
That's right.
And the massacre of the birds and bats is really sad because this will destroy our environment. It's funny. There's a film called Planet of the Humans, put out by Michael Moore, a left-wing film producer, and he shows, and you have to look this up, Alice, type in Planet of the Humans, you can actually watch it for free on the internet. He shows clearly that when you look at how they're made and how they operate, wind and solar power are the dirtiest energy sources on the planet.
Yes, wow. And there's something else about bats. They are fascinating. I have a bat house.
They sure are. Yes.
Yeah, there's a bat house on a tree on my property, and it was a gift to my late husband. But yes, you are absolutely right, and thank you so much for speaking up for people like me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, Alice, as you know, the signal of Talk Radio 77 WABC is powerful. We thank Alice in the Buckeye State in Ohio. But I want to ask you about something or mention something to the audience. Alice brought it up. We know from science, 5 major extinctions: the Ordovician, the Devonian, the Permian, the Triassic, Cretaceous. I mean, we could go line by line to talk about this. But she brings up a good point. Not that we intend to go out and just say, today I'm going to poison the ground with mercury. I'm going to poison it with all kinds of chemicals and, the batteries that explode and things of that nature. But the Earth does have. That's an interesting thing. Bring that to the table, Tom. The Earth does have this healing effect over the course of, look at how many years the Earth's been around and bombarded.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the common thesis in the environmental movement is that the Earth is on this sort of knife edge. It's such a fragile system. All we have to do is push it a little bit, and it'll go to catastrophe. But that hasn't happened in history. Right. Okay, and this is, the end of my story with this local scientist who said that I was wrong on the Venus thing. He showed me the geologic history of the Earth along with carbon dioxide and temperature. And right now, we're at one of the lowest levels of CO2 in Earth's history. And you go back, let's say, 400 million years, which is when it was the coldest in the last 500 million years. That was so cold, some people, scientists, they actually think that even the oceans were covered with ice. CO2 levels were more than 10 times higher than today. And this is what changed me from a climate alarmist to a climate realist. I looked at the geologic record. I contacted other scientists. And what was clear is that there are cycles in the Earth system that have nothing to do with humans. CO2 will go up, it'll go down, and temperatures will go up. And there's no correlation. That's the amazing thing. Sometimes CO2 is 10 times higher than today, and we're in very cold conditions. Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes it's just in the middle. And, that's where the climate activists just have missed the boat. If they actually look at the record, it doesn't support the climate scare.
Right. This is an amazing topic, ladies and gentlemen. Our special guest, Tom Harris, will continue here. Let's say good morning to Carlos in the Bronx. Good morning, Carlos. Your comments and questions on the subject of the hour.
Hey, good morning. How you doing? It's this first-time listener, and I just happened to turn on the radio coming in here and on the highway by Yonkers.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and I find it so fascinating, right, that you're talking about. And you reference a lot of things about Star Trek and that. And I remember when you had those commercials back in the 70s with Leonard Nimoy, and he used to talk about, it's going to be the next ice age in the next 10 years. And then it was
Remember that? And they thought that
you got it.
Ice ages were coming.
Yeah, and then it was the acid rain. The acid rain is going to happen. And the ozone, there's a big hole in the ozone. And, back then, you get into these discussions with people that are real, or, obviously on the left or whatever, the climate change.
You're right, Carlos.
Whatever you want to call them. And I get into these real, debates, and I said, well, wait a minute, it doesn't make sense, and then you got the clown's name, I'm sorry, Harry, the one who flies, and he goes, he goes out there, talks in Congress, and pretends he knows what he's doing, yet he takes his, massive jet over there to debate and
Al Gore, Carlos, I got to tell you about a new book. It's actually put out by Bob Carter. And actually, it's not that new, it appears. But in the introduction to that book, he talks about what's called catastrophilia. Catastrophilia is the wide-eyed call to action, constantly to solve all these problems. And what we're seeing, and you just labeled it perfectly. I mean, it was global cooling, then it was acid rain, then it was ozone depletion, and now it's global warming.
Exactly.
This is catastrophilia. Because generally speaking, the Earth is not this sensitive system that's going to suddenly run to catastrophe. Pat Michaels, he just passed away, unfortunately. He was a meteorologist, climatologist from University of Virginia. He said, no, we should talk about the robust Earth. The Earth has recovered and survived much, much worse than anything.
You say it so well there, Tom, and I want to ask Carlos a question. Carlos, we appreciate you as a first-time caller, but let me ask you, what got you electrified about this subject? To you, what's the most important thing, in your humble opinion? I think I know where you're going. You think this is a big fraud, a scam? Tell us.
This is more, in my opinion, it's just how the wording that is used, the manipulation, the propaganda, and the way that people understand that behind the scenes, and you just explained it, how the billions of dollars that is spent on nonsense and waste, and yet the media in itself, it's not out there. I don't know. It's like they have an agenda. Call me conspiracy realist.
I'm not at all.
Right. They do. And can I
use the word?
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead, gentlemen.
This is really important to understand. The media have an objective to sensationalize and make it look like a catastrophe, and there's several reasons for that. One is because catastrophe and bad news sells. You remember Johnny Cash said, good news travels slow, while bad news travels like wildfire. Good news travels slow.
Precisely.
And, Mark Twain said this, so the lie has got twice around the earth before the truth has its shoes on. And so the media knows that catastrophe sells media. But there's another reason, and this is a little bit more hidden, and that is that many of these companies, car companies, printing companies, all sorts of companies who say they're reducing greenhouse gases to save the earth, they're using that as a sales pitch to sell their products. And they buy full-page ads on newspapers for tens of thousands of dollars each. And so the last thing the newspaper wants is to have somebody on the next page saying the whole thing is bunk. Okay, and that was actually admitted to me by a leading Canadian editor. He said, look, we're not going to publish you guys. We're not going to publish you guys because our revenue comes from the advertisers who are using the climate scare to sell their products.
Carlos, you get the last word if you're with us. Thanks for calling and being a first-time caller. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Real quick, and I like when we were talking about the propaganda, the name change, and I remember I noticed that it was like it went from global warming all of a sudden to climate change. I'm like, wait a minute, this is like a word game they playing. Now, one quick question before I leave, sir.
Go ahead.
That earthquake that happened in Russia and to talk about the tsunami, can you add on that? Anything to be concerned? Is that something that,
Carlos, I'm going to have to cut it short with this because we're almost up against the break, but I promise a good answer will come to you. But thanks for being a first-time caller. I hope you'll call the Dr. Sky Experience in the future. We got lots to share with you. So thanks for being on board with us, brother. Appreciate that. Tom, the earthquake, I was on here on WABC the other night with the Rita Cosby Show discussing this, and it's interesting because we never did see, and thank goodness, the maximal damage that could have come from this particular undersea quake. And that's a mystery, too, as to what's going on, because somebody said to me, hey, can we get a 10 or a 12 on the Richter scale. And I said, no, that's impossible because the fault line, there's no fault line that would be necessitating that kind of a length for that kind of an impact. But that's an interesting story unto itself. How the whole Ring of Fire is just another fascinating story. So we got about a minute.
It shows how powerful nature is. I mean, it
absolutely
reminds me of, remember George Carlin, the comedian?
Yeah, I sure do.
Yeah, he was great. I'll just give you a quote because I just loved him. He said, okay, so these environmentalists are saying, save the whales, save the snails, save the trees, save the bees, save the planet? He says, what? We can't even save ourselves. We're going to worry about a few plastic bags?
You're right, and thank you for the quote that we didn't have to use beep, bleep, bleep on there on the air on public airwaves. We'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen. Tom Harris is our guest. Your calls are important to us, and if you didn't get on yet, Shay in New Jersey, Frank in Maine, and everybody else at 1-800-848-9222. We'll get to you as we talk about this important subject, the concept of climate change, reality or not. We'll be right back.
Now, the latest from the 77 WABC newsroom.
Jack White, the White Stripes frontman, is not a fan of President Trump. He's made that clear, having called him a con man and grifter. He recently criticized the Oval Office's decor, saying it's gaudy. Well, that drew a response from a White House staffer, Stephen Chung, who said Jack White is washed up. 77 WABC host Anthony Cumia observing,
you know what's great about the Trump White House and the Trump administration and their access to social media? They know what kills these people. The worst thing you could tell a celebrity is that they're washed up. Oh, they'll say it's fine. Oh, really? Am I? That's all celebrities think about. You know, you're only as good as your last movie. You're only as good as your last song. And let's be real here. Jack White hasn't really been tearing up the charts with anything he's done. So calling him washed up does hurt, no matter what they say.
Jack White and the White Stripes, best known for Seven Nation Army.
A Seven Nation Army couldn't hold me back.
In a lengthy Instagram post, White retaliated against the White House, calling him a has-been and a low-life fascist. Man, the fascist thing. Can we just be in touch a little with reality? Is he really a fascist? Are you not allowed to do every single thing that any other American is allowed to do by rights in this country? But the fascist... Oh, the fascism of hearing opinions you don't like? Is that the fascism? Yes, sorry.
Listen to Anthony Cumia every Sunday night, 8 to 11 p.m., and download his show as a podcast on the 77 WABC app. For WABC News, I'm James Flippin.
The views and opinions expressed by the individual hosts and their guests do not necessarily reflect the policies or positions of WABC Radio, its management, or its sponsors.
This is 77 WABC Newsroom Extra.
The NYPD appears to be coming out of a hiring crisis. Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch swore in nearly 1,100 recruits on August 20th, the most of any class to enter the police academy since 2016.
It tells us that policing in this city is being rebuilt, that the call to service is being answered, and that the future of public safety is being secured.
Back in February, the NYPD made some changes to help with recruiting, including lowering the required college credit minimum to enter the police academy.
The noblest job anyone could choose is back in a big way, and it tells me that the years of indiscriminately bashing the police are behind us.
The department is on pace to beat a record set in 1984 with the most officers hired in a single year. I'm Lisa Ritchie, 77 WABC News.
This is the Dr. Sky Experience. Always look to the sky. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. Another quote from the late, great Albert Einstein. 46 minutes after the hour, ladies and gentlemen, we continue our conversation and dialogue with Tom Harris, Executive Director of the International Climate Science Coalition, spending his early Saturday morning and Sunday morning with us here on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Wow, you really are very popular there, and I know you're a modest man, so let's say good morning to Shay in New Jersey. You've waited long enough. Good morning to you, sir. Your comment or question.
Good morning, Dr. Sky. You have a great show, and I'm a first-time caller.
Thank you, sir.
My question is two parts, a couple parts to it. Up until Thursday, this summer in the New York City area has seemed to be more humid than ever. The oceans are warmer, and I'm wondering am I correct that it has been abnormally humid, and if so, is that due to the warmer temperatures? And if the answer to that is yes, how does that work? Does the higher temperatures affect the jet stream or the Gulf Stream to raise the humidity?
Well, Shay, this is amazing, and thanks for being a first-time caller. Let's go to Tom first, and then I have something to add to that also that I think many people may find at least interesting from climatology. Tom, take that on. Sure. I think that's great what Shay's asking.
Yeah, you have to realize that for cities, they will generally get hotter and hotter because they're expanding. And you have something called the urban heat island. When you actually cut down a forest and put up a parking lot, it just absorbs more heat and releases it at night. So generally speaking, you're going to see cities setting records for higher and higher temperatures as they grow. But, here's something, Shay, that you probably don't know, and you should check it out on the web. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration have a database of all the extreme weather records for states. And a state is more meaningful because it's a much bigger area. And, they look at things like the maximum temperature, the most rain, the strongest wind gust, the biggest hailstone, things like that. And by the way, Colorado had a hailstone of, believe it or not, more than half a foot in diameter.
Glad that didn't hit my car, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, the interesting thing is when you look at this database, and again, it's more meaningful than cities because cities have this urban heat island. When you look at the database, which is statewide records, what you find is that in 1936, in the middle of the Dust Bowl, there were 27 extreme weather records set. Okay, 27, like highest temperature and all sorts of things. Last year, there were 0. There was not a single record set in temperature, wind speed, all the different parameters. I don't know about humidity. I haven't seen that included in a database. But the only thing I have to point out is that New York's record, I don't know where, I don't have the database in front of me, but undoubtedly it was a long time ago. So whatever's happened in New York City is largely due to the urban heat island effect, and that certainly could increase humidity.
Shay, I wanted to jump in with a theory here, and this is very interesting. It comes from meteorologists, not all the consensus, and Tom, I think you'd enjoy hearing this. You may know all about it. Shay, back in 2022, January, in the South Pacific near Fiji, there was an undersea volcano called the Hunga Tonga submarine volcano. That's a lot of words, right? Mm-hmm. Look this up, everybody. Shay, this is interesting. What they say happened, this was like a nuclear explosion. It killed many people, and obviously it was in a pretty remote area in the ocean. But what happened, the shock wave went around the Earth about 5 times and literally shook the Earth maybe a few millimeters in its positional location. But what is interesting, you're asking about humidity increases, things in the New York metro, they're saying that this pushed up so much vapor into the upper stratosphere that many, many weather systems around the world have been altered, not because of man-made climate change. But, Shay, that's interesting. That could be one of the, conduits as to why this is happening. Isn't that fascinating, Shay? I mean, something like
what's the name of that volcano again?
Say, it's called the Hunga Tonga submarine volcano. It's a lot to say.
But if you research it,
T-O-N-G-A. Like the Hunga, like H-U-N-G-A, Tonga, T-O-N-G-A, submarine volcano. Meteorologists, climatologists are saying that may have put so much vapor into the upper stratosphere because we're seeing different colored, sunsets, the most magnificent, beautiful purples and things. That's because we're going to get at this with Tom, Shay. The volcanism has been, a direct correlation to the CO2 production and, manifestation on the Earth. So, Shay, without a lot of words, thank you for being a first-time caller. I hope you'll join us again.
Yeah, I have noticed one related point that the pollution in certainly New York City has kept the daytime highs from not hitting 100 degrees since 2012, whereas out here in New Jersey, we've hit 100 many times. including.
Yeah, and you know what it could be, gentlemen. And again, I'm not the meteorologist on this by no means, and certainly I'm not the one to be the most qualified. You know, Tom has much more details. But also look at the Canadian fires that have influenced the area in the New York area and the metropolitan area and the Northeast. Yeah. It's a very amazing story. Shay, thank you for being with us. I hate to cut it short because we're trying to get as many callers to the top of the hour, but everybody's important, and hope you'll call us again. Thank you so much. Let's say good morning now to Frank in the great state of Maine, the home of Stephen King, as we talk to Frank often. Good morning. How you doing up there?
I'm doing well, Dr. Sky. Interesting conversation about climate change. And Carlos stole some of my thunder. I remember that In Search of a show with the oncoming ice age. I remember that show, believe it or not, in 1975 when Leonard Nimoy did it. But you know, the media with The Day After Tomorrow and Geostorm and these movies that exacerbate the issue of climate change and what's going to happen to the earth. Does that and to Mr. Harris, does that make your job a little bit harder that the media is totally against you and for these climate people that are the climate activists that are actually like trying to promote these big windmills that will eventually destroy the whales?
Great question, Frank. Always a good one from you.
Yeah, and there's no question that it is difficult to get the word out when the media are so biased. I mean, back around 2005, I would get published from coast to coast across Canada and in many newspapers in the United States. But around 2005, partly because of Al Gore and because of the movement towards the left in many institutions, the media just pulled back and they suddenly decided that they were not going to publish us deniers. And, of course, the reason was partly because of finance. They wanted to sell more advertising. But, the left have been incredibly successful using what's called Alinsky's rules. Okay, Saul Alinsky was a community organizer in Chicago in around 1970, Absolutely. And he wrote a book. He wrote a book that everybody, even on the conservative side, maybe especially on the conservative side, should read. It's called Rules for Radicals. And he lays out how you change society, how you make it so that some things are politically correct and some things are not. And we have to use the same tactics to take back these institutions. The media, for example, used to be, the kind of examiner of both sides of issues, but they're not anymore. They're propaganda, and it's very difficult to get published. I mean, the Washington Times will publish us. Forget about the Washington Post. I used to even get articles in the Los Angeles Times, but I can't get that anymore because, like you suggested, the media have all sided with the climate scare, largely because it's politically correct and because it's
and of course being facetious, ladies and gentlemen. It's settled, right? I mean, come on, now, give me a break. Yeah. Let's have more conversation. Frank, you get the last word. We're almost out of time, but always it's a pleasure to hear you and appreciate what you do and calling in with great questions and content.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Sky. I appreciate that. Up here in Maine, I think President Trump stopped this train, but they were trying to put windmills off the coast of Bar Harbor, Maine, where Arcadia National Park is. And I think people were up in arms because of the natural beauty of Arcadia. So that was stopped temporarily. But the governor up here she is an activist, crazy person who wants to put windmills and make sure that everybody drives electric cars. So we're trying to stop it up here. But always a pleasure, Dr. Sky, whenever I get
Well, thank you, Frank. I always appreciate you and your commentary to the show. But I wanted to add something, Tom, before the clock runs out here. Going back to our New York audience, primarily here, the home of Talk Radio 77, WABC, of course, and to everybody around the nation, let's take, in accordance with Tom is saying here, and I get it loud and clear, that we cannot just blame humans for the temperature changes. Here we go. In the state of New York, the maximum temperature was 108 degrees back on July 22nd of 1926 in Troy, New York. The minimum temperature was 52 degrees below zero Fahrenheit, February the 18th. 1979 in Old Forge, New York. And in 24 hours, the highest precipitation, according to a reliable source that I'm quoting, 13.57 inches that occurred between August the 12th and 13th, 2014 at Long Island's MacArthur Airport. And then how about this? Continuing on only before the clock runs out. The highest is New York 24-hour snowfall in New York State, 50 inches back on February 1st, 1966 in Camden. And the deepest snow depth in New York State, and ready, 119 inches back on April 20th, 1943, Whiteface Mountains. If you go back in time, right, Tom? How can all that be attributed to humans way back then?
That's right. When people say, oh, you're a climate change denier, I say, no, climate changes all the time. I mean, I deny that I deny climate change. I'm a denier.
I never thought of that one. Climate changes all the time. It's very good.
Yeah, of course.
No, that's interesting.
A good thing. It's a good thing because where I'm standing right now, there was 2 kilometers of ice 25,000 years ago. So thank God for climate change.
You got it. And let me just go out to our New York audience right now. We're hearing reports, of course, of the earthquake that's happened hours ago. I wonder if our listeners in the New York metro area, did you feel anything? Some say, as of course the WABC newsroom is going to be, of course, and they are already on top of this. We'll be hearing much more about it. But interesting information as it correlates to the entire Earth changes and cycles. That Mother Earth, obviously, Tom, is a very active participant, and particularly around the Ring of Fire. But when you get earthquakes that are in the deep, igneous, thick rock of northern, let's say, New York State, up through the New England area and in southern Canada, that's an interesting phenomenon that goes.
All right, we are going where?
Back to school shopping.
This is the Playoffs for Parenting, aka getting ready to get back to school. As we get ready for back to school,
doesn't matter your income, your race, your background, whether you have a disability or not.
Our public schools are a place where all kids feel like they belong.
My child.
My children. My family. My friends' kids.
My community.
All students.
All students.
All students belong in a great public school.
Let's get ready for back to school at NEA.org/backtoschool.